Last Cathaoirleach, I wish to acknowledge the very positive tourism start for the gathering so far this year, Last Cathaoirleach. I welcome the positive result for Irish tourism at the end of last year and for the start of the gathering year. Overseas visitor numbers finished strongly in 2012 and have got off to a very good start in 2013, with a 4.4% increase from all market areas between November last and the end of January this year. I'm very pleased to see such a very successful start to the gathering, with increased tourism performance at the end of last year continuing into this year. There was particularly strong growth from North America and other long-haul markets between November last and January this year, and continued growth from mainland Europe. These figures also confirm that visitor numbers from Britain have stabilised, which should provide a solid foundation of renewed growth in this market. And I believe, Last Cathaoirleach, that there is a great room to improve our tourism visitors from our nearest neighbours in Great Britain. If we compare the 3-month period November last to January with the same period in 2011-2012, overall trips to Ireland were up by 4.4%. North America was up by 12.2%, and visits from mainland Europe were up by 5.2%, with Scandinavia up a significant amount of 26%, Italy 11.8%, and Spain 5.6%, performing particularly well. Visitors from the rest of the world increased by 16.1%, with Australia and New Zealand growing by over 30%. Like Senator Quinn, Last Cathaoirleach, I believe that there are tourism opportunities from the Far East, from China and Japan, and from all the eastern countries. Great Britain registered an increase of 0.6% in visits, and as I have already stated, there is room for increased visitor numbers from Great Britain, and I look forward to an increase in numbers, Last Cathaoirleach, in the coming year, the year of the gatherings.
Senator Wilson.
Thank you, Last Cathaoirleach, and I'd like to support the comments made by Senator Janice Landy in relation to the shared ownership scheme. There are difficulties that need to be addressed, and addressed urgently. It seemed like a good idea at the time, but there are difficulties arising out of it that need to be addressed, and addressed urgently. Could I ask the leader? A number of weeks ago, I mentioned that there were difficulties with PAYE workers receiving rebates that they were due since the end of last year from the Revenue Commissioners. Now, I understand that the difficulty in them receiving the rebate has that there is a difficulty with the computer system within the Revenue. There doesn't seem to be difficulty within the Revenue when it comes to October, November, when you have to pay the tax. But when they're due to give rebates that PAYE workers are legally entitled to, there's a difficulty with the computer. Could I ask you, Leader, to take a look at it, see what the difficulty is and if it can be rectified? And while you're doing that, could you ensure that when the Revenue are sending out the property tax notifications or valuations, that they're not delayed in getting to Meath East in the next couple of weeks? Thank you.
Margaret, Leader to respond.
Thank you, Cathaoirleach, and I'd like to join in the welcomes to Professor Huxley, who's, I don't know whether he's still in the gallery or not, but also to welcome Gilbert Lee Maher, a great grandson of Thomas Francis Maher. And on a conciliatory note, I'm prepared to accept the amendment to the order of business that has been proposed in relation to the Irish flag. The Irish flag, which was flown in Waterford for the first time in this country in 1848, March the 7th. So we have the 165th anniversary of the flying of the flag in Ireland for the first time. And it is an opportune time to have the great-great-grandson of Thomas Francis Maher here in the House, and I think the House would join with me in welcoming Gilbert Lee Maher to the Distinguished Visitors Gallery here this afternoon. I hope to have the opportunity of meeting him later, and indeed meeting him in Waterford in the Granville Hotel, which was also associated with the Thomas Francis Marr back in those years. And back to the politics of the day and the order of business, Senator McSharry, in relation to the property tax. I will endeavour to get more time from the Minister, if at all possible, but I can't give any guarantees that I will be able to change the order of business. But I will try and get more time for committee stage, if at all possible. With regard to the National Roads Authority and the projects that have been deferred, the whole question of dangerous roads, I can assure you, will be addressed, and finance will be made available, and I think there will be further announcements on that in the near future. Senator Bacic and indeed Senator Keane, Senator Crown and others in relation to the recent surrogacy case, and it is important that we as legislators and indeed the government legislate for this. I think we've dragged our heels on that for quite some time, and I can remember, as Senator Bacic has said, former Senator Mary Henry championed this issue for many years in this House. So I would hope that the government will act, and with that we can have some legislation in that regard in the near future. And also the point that Senator Keane made, the assisted human reproductive report, that we could possibly have a debate on that in the House soon with the Minister, where she can, or he or she can, outline the position of government on this. Senator Bacic also raised the question of prison conditions and the report from the Justice Committee that will be forthcoming in the near future. And yes, we will arrange a debate on that report from the Joint Oireachtas Committee on Justice. Senator Mullins and indeed Senator Conway and others in relation to the gypsum used in bedding for animals and the fact that it gives off hydrogen sulfate. This is a very serious matter. It is banned in other countries, and I would think that it should be banned here, and I'll certainly bring the matter to the Minister with a view to taking immediate action on that very important issue which has been raised by the Senator. Senator Barrett, in relation to electricity prices, the need to have the Minister Bruton to come into the House and question how much damage it is doing to the competitiveness of our country, and I'll certainly address that matter with Minister Bruton. Senator Landy, Senator Kelly and indeed Senator O'Murrocoe in relation to the issue of shared ownership and the difficulties that people have with the shared ownership scheme, and to ask the Minister to come into the House to review this scheme with the possibility of abandoning the scheme altogether. And I'll certainly raise the matter with Minister Jan O'Sullivan with a view to her coming into the House to address that matter. Senator Cullinan, we will have a debate on the property tax after the order of business, and Senator Cullinan can raise any points that he wishes to raise at that particular point in time. Senator Burke on the cost of drugs and generic drugs and the fact that they're a lot cheaper in the UK. I know the Minister did conclude negotiations with the drug companies recently, and there have been quite an amount of reduction in the cost of drugs, but there is obviously a need to reduce them further. And I note his point in relation to the Law Commission, Reform Commission report and the bill that he has on the order paper also, and we will try and expedite that. Senator Mooney in relation to the illegal detentions in Palestine and Tim Marshall's report, and I'd certainly relay his comments to An Taoiseach on that matter. Senator Hart in relation to the dumping of chemical waste off Donegal in the early 50s. We'll try and get an update for Senator Hart on that matter, and it's possibly something that he would get a more emphatic and detailed reply to if he put it in the form of an adjournment motion. Senator Norris in relation to the forthcoming referendum on the abolition of the Seanad. And can I say to Senator Norris, the Taoiseach has no power whatsoever to abolish this House. It's the people who will decide whether this House will stay or not. Senator Conway, in relation to the construction of a pier in the beautiful village of Doolin and the creation of long-term and sustainable employment in that area, and I think we would all wish the project well. Senator Kelly seeking clarity on the property tax for people who are paying shared ownership, and that matter can be addressed with the Minister when he's in here after the order of business. Senator O'Neill in relation to CAP negotiations and having a debate on that, and also Senator O'Keefe calling for the Minister for Agriculture to come into the House to discuss not only CAP negotiations but also the whole question, the horsemeat controversy, and certainly I'll try and get the Minister into the House. I know the Minister is addressing actually today a conference, a very important conference on food safety. And I would agree with her sentiments that people defrauding the system should be brought to justice. There's no question about that. Senator Quinn calling for a debate on energy. We have had debates on energy in the past, but certainly we can have a further debate. And there was actually in the British-Irish Parliamentary Association over the weekend, Sunday and Monday and yesterday morning in Donegal. That whole conference was designated towards the whole area of renewable energy, and it was certainly a very interesting gathering which the Minister did address, and quite a number of other people that are involved in the energy sector. I would agree with him that we should have a further update on that issue soon. And I noticed comments also, very important comments in relation to certain stores that are now employing people, Chinese, the Chinese in particular there, to attract and to be able to address the concerns of tourists. And I think this is a very good initiative by the store in question, and I'm sure it will be followed by many other stores throughout the country. Senator Brennan in relation to the gathering and the increase in tourism figures, and which are certainly to be welcomed, and I think we would all hope that will continue well into the year. And indeed, Senator Wilson, I will certainly try and find out from him what the problem is in rebates to PAYE workers. And as he stated, the revenue have no problem in collecting the tax, but they can be a little slow, obviously, in this regard. But I will address the matter with the Minister and see what we can do to speed up that. Thank you, Cahill.
Margaret. Amendment to the order of business. Senator Mark Daly has moved an amendment to the order of business that item 25, motion number 10, be taken before item 1. The leader has indicated that he is prepared to accept this amendment, and I call on Senator Daly to formally move the amendment.
Thank you, Cahill. Again, I'd like to thank the leader, and I formally move the amendment.
Okay. And we need to have a second. Second the motion. Okay. Is the amendment agreed? Agreed. Is the order of business as amended agreed?
Order, please. It's just that I noticed on the order paper that it says Finance Committee look Property Tax Amendment Bill 2013, second stage. That was the only advice we got, second stage, and we've not yet been. I understand we're going to take all stages in a violation of democracy, and we haven't received the sheet of amendments yet. So we're really being deprived of the tools necessary for us to perform our constitutional function.
We won't have a debate on this. Can I just for clarification ask, the amendments have been agreed, can I ask Senator Daly to formally move the motion? Not the amendment, the motion.
I formally move the motion.
Yeah, you already done the amendment, that's agreed, so, and, second, is the motion, is motion agreed to?
Agreed.
Yeah. So, and can I ask now, is the order of business as amended agreed to? Is that how?
Agreed.
Yeah. Okay.
Yeah.
Good, but I'm not going to pull a vote. I'd just like to be recorded as not agreeing to it.
Okay. So, item number, yes, the order of business amended is agreed to. Yes. We know your objections. Yes. Yeah, I asked that already.
Point of clarification, Senator.
Okay, he said he went. Number 1, Finance Local Property Tax Amendment Bill 2013, second stage.
Tara.
Cahirlock, thank you very much for the opportunity of coming to the House to debate this matter a second time. I move that this bill now be read a second time. The Finance Local Property Tax Act 2012 was enacted into law following its signature by the President on the 26th of December 2012. The Minister for Finance, Deputy Noonan, signalled the commencement order bringing the Act other than sections 19, 20 and 21 into operation with effect from the 1st of January 2013. Sections 19, 20, 21, which relate to the local adjustment factor, will come into operation with effect from the 1st of July 2014. The introduction of the Act met one of our programme commitments to the Troika, which had to be completed by the end of 2012. Senators will recall that this commitment was entered into by the previous government. Given this Troika commitment and the government's determination to fix the national finances in a manner which supports job creation, we have chosen to implement the local property tax. The local property tax will keep taxes on jobs such as income tax unchanged. Recent ESRI research shows that a property tax has the advantage of being 6 times more job-friendly than tax on work and on income. This government, Cahirlock, is determined to do everything in our power to protect and support the creation of jobs, and yesterday's employment figures for the last quarter of 2012 were encouraging, representing the first annual increase in employment recorded since 2008. This bill is now being introduced to give effect to commitments that the Minister made during the passage of the Finance Local Property Tax Bill 2012 through the House last December, in addition to some further issues that have since been raised and some minor technical amendments. Before I go through the bill in detail, I wish to draw the attention of the House to the key positive amendments contained in it. I also want to point out, in response to some of the comments in the other House, that the Revenue Commissioners are legally independent in the operation of their duties, which will include the administration of the local property tax. The Minister has agreed with his colleague, the Minister for the Environment, Community and Local Government, Deputy Hogan, that houses demonstrated to be subject to a certifiable level of pyrite heave should receive an exemption from the local property tax. The exemption may be claimed for 3 consecutive liability dates. The Minister for the Environment, Community and Local Government will provide regulations stipulating how residential properties should be tested for pyrite-induced damage. These regulations will also provide for the issue of a certificate in respect of a property that has been verified as having a level of damage significant enough to warrant exemption. The Government is conscious of the difficulty some homeowners are experiencing in meeting their mortgage obligations. Under new proposed amendments, a person who has entered into an insolvency agreement, that's a debt settlement agreement or a personal insolvency arrangement under the Personal Insolvency Act, may qualify for a deferral of the local property tax that falls due for payment by that person during the period from which the insolvency arrangement is in effect, where a valid claim is made to the Revenue Commissioners. Further proposed new measures provide for the possibility of a deferral for owners who cannot, without excessive hardship, pay local property tax when it becomes available, as a consequence of a significant and unexpected financial loss or expense. This particular deferral will operate on a different basis to deferral arrangements provided for in the original Act. A person must apply in writing to the Revenue Commissioners for the deferral and meet the criteria that will be set out in the guidelines to be published by the Revenue Commissioners. Deferral cannot commence until the Revenue Commissioners have received whatever information and documentation they require to make a decision, and having made that decision, notify the owner that deferral is allowed, subject to whatever conditions they may impose in accordance with the guidelines that will be published. The bill also allows for a reduction in the chargeable value of a property that has been adopted for occupation by a disabled person, where the adaptation has been grant-aided by a local authority. The reduction is limited to the lesser of the chargeable value attributable to the adaptation work carried out on the property and the maximum grant payable under the relevant local authority scheme. The relief will not apply after the sale or transfer of the property unless the person with the disability continues to reside in the property. The bill also provides for an exemption for a residential property that is purchased or adapted for use as a sole or main residence by an incapacitated individual, where an award has been made by the Personal Injuries Assessment Board or court, or where a trust has been established specifically for the benefit of permanently and totally incapacitated individuals. To be exempt, a residential property must be acquired or adopted to make it suitable for occupation by an incapacitated individual. To avail of the exemption, the adaptation costs must be greater than 25% of the chargeable value of the property before the work took place. The exemption will no longer apply if the property is sold and the incapacitated individual no longer occupies it as his or her sole or main residence. The bill also allows a personal representative of a deceased liable person, where that person was the sole liable person in relation to the residential property, to qualify for a deferral on making the required valid claim. The deferral may be claimed in respect of local property tax that was due and unpaid at the time of the liable person's death, local property tax that was deferred by the deceased liable person, and the local property tax that falls due in the 3 years immediately following death. The bill limits the period of time for which personal representatives may qualify for a deferral to 3 years, commencing with the date of death. However, if the person representative is in a position to transfer the property to a beneficiary or to distribute the sales proceeds where the property has to be sold, the period of deferral ends at that point. In all cases, the personal representative may be responsible for payment of the deferred local property tax when the period of deferral comes to an end. As previously indicated, properties used for accommodation purposes by groups such as Girl Scouts or Scouts will receive an exemption from the local property tax. This was on foot of a commitment given by Minister Noonan during the second stage debate on the bill in response to a proposal that had been set out by Senator Van Turnhout. And we welcome that. The bill now provides for an exemption for residential properties used by a charitable body for recreational activities connected with its charitable purpose, where this is not done on a commercial basis. The chargeable value of all properties for which the liable person is a local authority or an approved housing body will be deemed to be within the first valuation band for the first valuation period. That's up to the 31st of October 2016. Local authorities and approved housing bodies may also defer their 2013 local property tax liability until 2014. This is to allow such bodies to put in place arrangements for the payment of the tax and for the valuation of their properties. An amendment that is proposed to deal with issues arising where there is a change of viable person being between valuation dates has been the focus of much media and opposition attention in recent weeks. Where the liable person changes between valuation dates, the vendor will be obliged to provide the purchaser with details of the chargeable value that was established on the first valuation date, along with any relevant documentation. Failure to comply may result in a fine of €500 being imposed on the seller of the property. The new owner is obliged to submit a revised return and chargeable value for the next liability date, where it appears to him or her that the chargeable value declared by the previous liable person was too low, given the circumstances that would have prevailed at the time that chargeable value was established. These amendments are intended to act as a deterrent against under-declaration of the chargeable value of a relevant residential property by a liable person who intends selling the property between the next valuation date. Contrary to media coverage and other public commentary, the new provisions offer a level of protection for purchasers. In the absence of this amendment, a deliberate and serious under-declaration of a property's value could be binding on a new owner or liable person where a property is sold before the next valuation date. This amendment allows the purchaser to advise revenue of what he or she consider to be the correct market value of the property, and relates only to the tax that would be purchasable by the purchaser. Any issues in relation to the original value placed in the property would be entirely a matter and solely a matter between revenue and the former owner. I'll now deal with the details of the sections of the bill. Section 1 defines the Principal Act as the finance local property tax. Section 2 amends Part 2 of the Act by providing exemptions from local property tax for residential properties used by a charitable body or recreational activities connected with its charitable purpose, and for residential properties purchased or adapted for occupation by permanently and totally incapacitated individuals. I outlined these new exemptions earlier in my speech. Section 3 amends Part 2 of the Principal Act to provide for exemption for a temporary period of at least 3 years for residential properties that have been affected by a significant level of pyrite-induced damage. Section 4 Cathaoirleach amends Part 3 of the Principal Act to clarify how it will apply in a number of situations where an occupier has not taken steps to establish title on the property. Section 5 makes several amendments, Cathaoirleach, to Part 4 of the Act relating to the charging provisions such as valuation of property and the rate of tax to be applied. Paragraphs A and B make amendments to Section 14 that are linked to an amendment made to Section 35. As I said previously, these amendments are intended to act as a deterrent against under-declaration of chargeable value of a relevant residential property by a liable person who intends selling the property before the next valuation date. Paragraphs C and K are a combination of minor technical amendments and amendments that clarify the operation of the Act in relation to the local adjustment factor. Section 6 inserts a new section, that is 15A, into the Act, providing for a reduction in the chargeable value of a property that has been adapted for occupation by a disabled person, where the adaptation has been granted by a local authority. Section 7 deals with residential properties owned by a local authority or an approved housing body. The chargeable value of such properties is deemed to fall into the first valuation band, that is up to €100,000, until the 1st of November 2016, the valuation date for 2017. In addition, the payable date for the 2013 local property tax liability is extended to the 1st of January 2014. Section 8 Cathaoirleach makes several amendments to Part 7 of the Principal Act regarding the return to be prepared and delivered to the Revenue Commissioners. Paragraphs A and C are minor technical amendments. Paragraph D is linked to the amendments in Section 5. Paragraph E substitutes more comprehensive provisions for Section 38 of the Principal Act, dealing with the linkage between late submission of a local property tax return and the submission of a return for income tax or indeed corporation tax. Late delivery of a local property tax return can result in an income tax or corporation tax surcharge under the Taxes Consolidation Act 1997. Section F, paragraph F rather, makes a minor technical amendment. Section 7 Cathaoirleach makes several amendments to Part 8 of the Act as regards estimates and assessments of local property tax made by the Revenue Commissioners. Paragraph B will facilitate notification of revenue estimates by electronic means. Paragraph C facilitates appeals where an assessment is made in respect of more than one property. The other amendments are technical in nature. Section 10 amends Part 9 of the Act to allow for an appeal by an owner against a determination of the Appeals Commissioners to be heard by the Circuit Court. This is in line with the appeal provisions in other areas of the tax code. Paragraph C amends Section 63 of the Act so that the Appeal Commissioners can require a liable person to provide information in relation to any property and not just a relevant residential property. Section 11 makes several amendments to Part 10 of the Act as regards the deduction of local property tax at source by employers, occupational pension providers and the Department of Social Protection and the Department of Agriculture, Food and Marine. Firstly, it gives priority over local property tax to deductions by an employer occupational pension provider under a court order, such as an order for the payment of maintenance, where such an order was issued before the deduction to local property tax was issued by the Revenue Commissioners. Secondly, it allows deductions for local property tax to be made from a repayment of income tax, PRSI or indeed universal charge, by an employer or occupational pension provider to a liable person. Paragraphs B and G make minor technical amendments to ensure that the formulation used in several provisions is consistent and clear. Section 12 makes several amendments to Part 11 of the Act in relation to the collection and enforcement of local property tax by the Revenue Commissioners. Paragraph A amends Section 119 to clarify that local property tax is due on a liability date, but may be paid on or before a subsequent date. For example, the liability date for 2013 is the 1st of May. However, initial payments may be made on or before the 1st of July. Similar provisions will apply in respect of future years. Paragraph B amends Section 120 in relation to a direction given by the Revenue Commissioners to employers, occupational pension providers and the Department of Social Protection and Agriculture to deduct local property tax at source where making payments to a liable person. New subsections 2 and 3 disapply the requirement for the Collector General to issue a demand for outstanding tax where such a direction is given, and allow the direction to be given after the local property tax is due, but before it is payable. However, tax need not be deducted until it is payable. Paragraphs C and D are intended to clarify the original provisions. Paragraphs E and F insert a new subsection 2 into section 126 to require a liable person who sells or otherwise transfers a relevant residential property after local property tax is due, but before it is payable, to pay that tax on completion of the sale of or transfer of the property. Paragraphs G and H, which were introduced by a committee stage amendment in the Dáil, provide that any local property tax liabilities that were not established before the sale of the property will not be a charge on the property for the new owner. Instead, the Revenue Commissioners will pursue the previous owner for payment of such liabilities. However, such liabilities will continue to be a charge on the property where the new owner does not submit an honest opinion on the market value of the property to the Revenue Commissioners when required to do so on the first liability date following the sale. Paragraphs I inserts a new section 147A that establishes a way of determining a liable person's local property tax liability for the purpose of charging a tax-geared penalty. That is a penalty that is a proportion of the outstanding tax rather than a flat amount. Section 13 amends Part 12 of the Act Caoirleach to introduce 3 additional categories that may qualify for deferral of local property tax. As I outlined earlier, these are the personal representative of a deceased liable person, an individual who enters into an insolvency arrangement. I think I already set that out in my speech. Section 14 deletes sections 140 and 143 from the Act. Section 143 is not a substantive provision and merely contains a definition of authorised person that is used in Section 143. Section 143 itself provides for the inspection of a residential property for the purpose of establishing the market value of the property by a person who is suitably qualified to do so and authorised to do so by the Revenue Commissioners. This section was introduced as a committee stage amendment in Dáil Éireann yesterday. Following on from concerns expressed by various deputies and indeed senators during the passage of the original Act to the Houses last December, officials of the Department and Revenue have, in conjunction with the Attorney General's Office, reviewed Section 143 of the Act and the Revenue Commissioner's power to inspect an individual's assets. In light of the advice received from the Office, the Minister decided that Section 143 should be repealed. In conjunction with this, he has provided for a new general provision in Section 98 in the Finance Bill of 2013 that applies to the various taxes and duties under the care and management of the Revenue Commissioners in relation to the valuation of an individual's assets, including their property. The effect of the amendment made by Section 98 in the Finance Bill will be to require a person who has been authorised by the Revenue Commissioners to value a particular asset to obtain a warrant from a judge of the District Court where the occupier of a private residence does not consent to the inspection of the property or of any assets in the property. The general provision will also apply to local property tax and to the inspection of residential properties. I should point out, Caoirleach, that it's anticipated that the need for the Revenue Commissioners to seek to inspect a residential property without the consent of the occupier should only arise on a very rare occasion. If the need for an inspection does arise, it is not anticipated that the occupier consent will be withheld. As a practical matter, it will be difficult to resolve a difference of opinion between a taxpayer and the Revenue Commissioners about the value of a property without the Revenue Commissioners procuring a professional valuation of the property, and this would necessarily involve an inspection. Section 15 amends Section 1094, subsection 1 of the Taxes Consolidation Act 97 to ensure that outstanding local property tax liabilities are taken into account when tax clearance certificates are being sought in relation to the issue of certain licences, for example, licences for the sale of alcohol. Section 1095 contains the general tax clearance certificate provisions that already applies in relation to outstanding local property tax liabilities. Section 16 makes a number of minor amendments to several parts of the Principal Act. Section 17 contains the short title of the bill, that is the Finance Local Property Tax Amendment Act 2013. As I stated earlier, Caoirleach, this bill is being introduced to give effect to previous governments' commitments made in relation to the new property tax. Senators will be aware of the upcoming May liability date and filing deadlines. In advance of these dates, commencing on the 11th of March, the Revenue Commissioners plan to do a bulk mail issue of a local property tax guide and return form to all homeowners to assist them in their preparation of the new tax. The passing of this legislation, Caoirleach, at this time will provide certainty to the Revenue Commissioners so that they can do the job that the Oireachtas is empowered and able to do. It will give homeowners time to consider the guide, to assess their liability and to make their return on time and to assist the smooth operation of the implementation of this tax. I commend the bill to the House.
Senator Daly. Thank you, Acting Cathaoirleach. I'd like to welcome the Minister to the House. Obviously, we've concerns, serious concerns about the property tax legislation as it's being brought in the format it's been brought in, because, as we know, it's a tax, not an income or shows ability to pay. As some describe it, it's a tax on debt. It is, as we've said many a time, the wrong plan at the wrong time because of so many people being in mortgage difficulties. And to bring in a property tax that doesn't have any correlation with people's actual income is going to put more and more people who are in mortgage difficulty into deeper and deeper trouble. And I think that's essentially our point, and has been our point all along, that in order to bring in a property tax, you need first of all to look at the mortgage crisis in the country, a situation where 30% of mortgages are either in arrears or have been restructured by the banks, which shows you the depth of the crisis. But what it doesn't show is how much worse it's going to get, because of the fact that we have the lowest central bank rate in Europe at the moment, with the ECB rate below 1%, and we have so many, 180,000 people on tracker mortgages. Tracker mortgages were introduced by the banks between 2004 and 2007, and that's when most of them were taken out, and that's when the highest prices were paid. So they're the people in the biggest negative equity, have the biggest loans out, and they're on tracker mortgages. They're lucky to be on tracker mortgages at the moment, because, as we see, the banks have free rein and have not been able to be controlled by the governments, this or the previous government, when it came to raising interest rates on those who weren't on tracker mortgages. But what is going to happen, and a certainty, is as the European Central Bank rate goes up over the next 3, 4, 5, 6 years, then all those people who are on tracker mortgages will become part of the group who are going to be in arrears, going to be in difficulty, going to need restructuring. So we are taking money from people on the universal social charge and cutting public sector pay, more tax and more cuts, and people, when their mortgage bill comes in, as the European Central Bank rate goes up, then we're going to have a bigger mortgage problem. And I've said it before in this House, Minister, that the guy who has told us that we need to solve our mortgage problem was none other than Bill Clinton. He said that at the Irish Global Economic Forum, the second anniversary of which is coming up this year in November. And to a real extent, we haven't actually tackled that problem at all, because we have brought in the legislation in relation to debt and debtors, and yet we know that that is only going to account for a few thousand people per annum. That doesn't take care of the hundreds of thousands of people who find themselves in mortgage difficulties. And we have this property tax, and I used to be an auctioneer, I'm still an auctioneer, to be sending out estimated valuations on properties is going to lead to widespread confusion. I am confused, and maybe the Minister could maybe clarify this at the amendment stage, is we read reports in the papers, and it still hasn't been clarified, is if somebody honestly puts in a figure of, 180,000, they pay the 180,000, that's what they believe it is, and then they sell the house in 5, 10 years' time, and somebody from the revenue decides, actually, you undervalued it in May 2013. We think you undervalued it by 50,000 back then, and with penalties, you owe us, tens of thousands of euros. Just if we could get clarification. The reason I asked for clarification is I've read different accounts in the papers as to what actually happens on those cases. And also in relation to the farming sector, I've asked the farming bodies, did they get clarification from the revenue? And apparently they have, on what happens when it comes to farmhouses which are adjacent to farm buildings. So when you're adjacent to a farm building, as a valuer, I'm well aware you cannot sell a farmhouse without selling the farm buildings. What we are told by the revenue commissioners is that you value the farmhouse an acre and buildings, but I believe farm buildings are to be excluded. What that would mean is that any farmhouse that is adjoining static units or any of the we'll say commercial element of their farm would literally be worth less than 100,000, because nobody will buy a farmhouse unless they have control of the adjoining sheds around it. So automatically the government are, by virtue of the valuations method that the revenue are talking about, ensuring that every farmer will pay under the 100,000, and I just wanted to get clarification on that issue as well. There are so many anomalies, and I suppose the biggest issue which was raised over in the committee stages in the Dáil was the ability to pay clause. I know that there are deferrals, those thresholds aren't particularly high. Deferral, of course, means you're only, to use that famous terminology, kicking the can down the road. But we have seen debt forgiveness for the guys who are the multi-millionaires, billionaires. And here we have all these mortgage holders struggling to pay their mortgage. We put a property tax on it, we keep cutting child benefit, we keep cutting the income of Gardaí, and that's of serious concern. And we've seen cases, and I'm sure colleagues opposite would be aware of Gardaí who are finding it difficult to pay their mortgages. If a Garda is taken to court for inability to pay, he loses his job, because a Garda can't be declared bankrupt and still retain his job. So, you know, we have not tackled the core issue, and if the mortgage issue was tackled, then the government bringing in a property tax that, you know, would be seen as part of what we should never have done, is got rid of property tax in 1977, and seen as part of normal government income and expenditure. But this is not a normal situation, so bringing in a property tax now does not solve the problem in terms of government revenue. It just adds to the problem by ensuring that people spend less money in the economy. They're afraid that their mortgages are going to go up, the tracker rates are going to go up. Then they're going to end up with a situation where we are going to ensure that the economy continues to spiral downwards. So from that point of view, I'd like to get the Minister's view on the issues of when can the revenue turn around, if the revenue can turn around, and get somebody and say, well, actually your property was undervalued day one. As a valuer, I would find it very difficult to go out and actually put an accurate valuation on people's houses. There's three methods of valuation. You do it by comparison. There's very little moving, so therefore how do you compare properties, especially in rural Ireland where properties can be uniquely different. And then you have the issue of a residual method where you get the site value and the cost of building the houses. Well, we all know that you actually can buy a house now for less than it would cost you to build it. So
your time is almost.
Thank you, I'll wrap up now. And then the income method, and we all know that rents have fallen in many areas and would not go next or near even covering the mortgage or giving a return to any owner, given all the taxes and charges they have on board. So in reality, Minister, I suppose the ultimate issue is that it is the worst time possible to be bringing in a property tax. Bill Clinton told us we must solve our mortgage issue, and we have not done that as a nation, and until we do that, our economy will continue to contract. So bringing in this now, of all times, is the worst possible move. It is not going to solve any problems, it's just going to create more. Thank you.
Senator Michael Darcy.
Thanks, Chair. I suppose there's no good time to bring in a new tax at any stage anywhere, because people don't like new taxes. But I think realistically, you have to make a decision: do you favour a property tax or not? And the basis of a property tax or not, when you compare property tax or increase income taxes, well, for me, there isn't any question that you don't increase income taxes. Income taxes increases are always a negative in relation to job creation. I held a financial forum in my own town of Gorey a few weeks ago, and there was 37 people at the meeting. And we put it to the meeting, a simple choice: implement a property tax or increase income taxes. And I have to admit I was very surprised with the outcome. Everybody was in favour of implementing a property tax versus increasing income taxes. I have to admit I was surprised. And it was a private ballot. Everybody had the option to put it on the record. Did a private ballot. I was really surprised, I have to admit. And I was equally as surprised when I took up the amendments for the property tax that are going to come before us when we get into the substantive debate from Fianna Fáil and my Fianna Fáil colleagues from within the chamber. And, you know, this isn't Dallas here, this chamber. And Micheál Martin isn't Bobby Ewing. He can't step out of the shower and say, well, we'll ignore all that went down in the past and say, how are you doing there, Pam? And we'll pretend that we had nothing to do with agreeing within the Memorandum of Understanding. Fianna Fáil, a government of which he was part of, one of the senior people in it, and agree wait for it, a property tax. Exactly what we are implementing. And I see it as somewhat dishonest in the position of Fianna Fáil in particular for their opposition to this. It's the wrong tax here and now. And as I said earlier, there's probably no right time to implement a new tax for the public. I have to admit, when you look at the Sinn Féin position also in Northern Ireland, well, they're capable of implementing a property tax, family home tax, whatever way you want to call it. You can put whatever term you wish upon it, but they, in their capacity as part of the executive in Northern Ireland, implement a much more expensive property tax than what we are talking about here. And this property tax is fixed until 2016, which I was very happy that the Minister agreed to do, so that there is clarity, that there is no equivocation, that we're not going to be told that the property tax is going to double next year and treble next year. It may or may not increase following the next general election, depending upon whoever is in power. Again, we need to put some facts on the table. There are 1.8 million homes or thereabouts that is the best guesstimate that are in the state. We do know how many mortgages there are, and we do know how many homes that those mortgages are upon. 750,000 thereabout mortgages on about 450,000 homes. So no matter what way we calculate the figures, the 1.85 million homes, if we take that figure, minus 450,000 homes that are mortgaged, there's about 1.4 million homes with no mortgage. Those are the facts. But there are other facts as well that I think we shouldn't ignore. And I am saying this, Minister, that in my opinion, and I'm pushing this on every occasion that I can, that there are a group of people who are in a particularly difficult position that I think the property tax should not apply for. There are some exemptions. Those people are the people who purchased at the peak of the boom from 2002 to 2008. Those people are the people who are in negative equity for whatever reason. Those are the same people who paid enormous stamp duty. And those are the same people whom the personal solvency bill will not apply to. Now you might say, how will the personal solvency bill not apply to them? The personal solvency bill will apply to somebody, as you know, Minister, who is in the very, very worst position. We're told there's about 45,000 people. But not everybody will want to go down the route of personal insolvency. And the people who I'm talking about are the people who will beg, borrow, scrape to hold on to their property in the event that they don't have to use the personal insolvency bill. So while the bill is there for people who see no exit except the usage of it, and for some there will be bankruptcy, there are, in my view, probably a much larger majority of people who will not use this. And I think the charge of property tax for those people, in my opinion, is wrong. And I can see the logic that the government does not wish for them to be many exemptions, otherwise it gets diluted and your 1.8 million homes becomes 1.4 or 1.5. And one of the things that I do see from most people who I've discussed the household charge with is that what angered the people who have paid most was that there was another coterie of people who do not pay, and that it is always the same people who make the payment. Similar to the television license, 80-85% of the people pay, but about 15% will not pay no matter what. And the people who have paid are satisfied to pay their taxes, as the vast majority of people within this state do. But the people who don't pay because they don't deem it appropriate for them to pay taxes, well, they should pay also. But the people who I'm talking about, who purchased at the peak, negative equity, paid enormous stamp duty, I do believe that there should be some leeway for those people to get a break, call it whatever you wish, that they have paid their personal solvency, or so they have paid their property tax in their stamp duty if they meet very strict criteria. And I think that can be done if the will is there for those people. And I think it will show on the part of the government that, apart from saying that, well, you can use a personal solvency, that this is another method in which the government is listening, that those people in particular, thank you, that those people in particular, we are trying to do something for them. That being said, it is not going to be a fortune for them anyway, but it is not the money. It is the principle that those people who have been caught in the peak of the boom, that the government is prepared to do something for them. I could talk about a lot of other issues. I would ask, Minister, that you would bring that message back from me. That is a very personal view that I hold strongly. A lot of people who are friends of mine who are just caught in that dilemma, who will not use the personal solvency bill. And I think we should try and do something for them. Thank you.
Senator Hayden.
Thank you very much, Laska Hurlock. I'd like to welcome the Minister to the House today on this matter. Just in relation to Senator Daly's point about this being the wrong time to introduce property tax, local government tax, whatever you want to call it, the reality of the matter is, I suppose, that it would have been better to have introduced it when taxes were buoyant and when you could have replaced a property tax with income tax with a property tax. In other words, redistribute the burden of taxation rather than have to introduce an additional burden of taxation. But, you know, as the saying goes, we are where we are. And your government didn't take that opportunity, you know, when that opportunity was there, and we have to remember that. I don't want to get back into the issues around the principal legislation, which were discussed in 2012. You know, the property tax, it does broaden the tax base, it is necessary. And I think importantly, and it's something that we haven't really engaged with, it will promote local accountability and it will improve local democracy. In relation to the legislation before us, though, some of the changes contained in it are of a minor nature, some of them are less so. And I want to speak to some of those changes. I am happy that the Minister saw fit to listen to the earlier debates, both in this House and in the lower house, and has brought forward amendments to the legislation. And I am hopeful in some of the comments that I'm going to make that you know, there will be other changes brought forward that will reflect the experience that we have in introducing this tax, because it is a new tax in this country. The previous tax was not a property tax per se, it was a form of rates, which was deeply unpopular because it was regarded as being deeply unfair. And I would not like us to make that mistake again. So we have a new form of tax which we've not had before in this country. And I think also, as I said, you know, it is a local tax designed, hopefully, to improve local democratic participation and will be re-evaluated in that context. I must say I welcome very much the changes which place properties owned by local authorities and voluntary housing associations in the lowest valuation band. I know that this valuation lasts only till 2016, but it is an important recognition of the role of social housing in particular and its social nature, which is, I think, a very important distinction between social housing and the rest of the housing stock. It provides social housing, as we know, and many people here come from the local authority background, provides housing for people who cannot reasonably provide it from their own resources. And, you know, while tenants whose circumstances change have had the opportunity to avail of tenant purchase, the reality is that tenants pay according to their means through the differential rent system. And therefore, in theory, they are paying according to their means. This is a difficulty when you have a tax that takes no account of people's individual circumstances. But I do believe that in valuing social housing, there is a need to take into account the fact that tenants of social housing are, and it has been proven to be the case, of very